I know, not my best instrument. But you probably recognize the banjo from bluegrass music. Stuff you would hear in Appalachia, places like Kentucky and West Virginia, that's usually played by hillbillies. After all, I was inspired to learn to play it by my kin in West Virginia. But believe it or not, the banjo actually wasn't created in America. It was actually created in West Africa and was brought over by slaves who then taught other people how to play the instrument. This instrument has gone from playing simple folk ballads to being used in almost every genre of music. In fact, even Led Zeppelin has used the banjo in a song. Banjo is now even commonly used in Irish folk music because Americans exported it there. You gave us St. Patrick's Day, here's a banjo. This instrument is an example of the cultural effects of migration, people moving from one region of the world to another. This brings us to the topic we're going to jump into this week. Immigration. Now, this is actually the first time I have ever done anything with my classes regarding the topic of immigration in my entire career of teaching government. Why? I have been terrified about facilitating a debate over this topic because people are particularly passionate about immigration, and I didn't want my classroom to end up like this. In fact, I don't even have to facilitate a debate over it. All I have to do is say the word immigration and
build that wall! Build that wall!
so you can kind of see why I've avoided this topic in the past. It's especially hard when I have students in class whose family members have lost jobs. Maybe they blame that on an increase in immigration, and maybe they've even experienced assault or robbery by someone they later found out was here illegally. On the flip side, and sometimes in the same class period, I have had students who are immigrants and desperately want to fit in, but feel excluded when their classmates say things that can come across like they don't really want them here. I've even had students and friends of my own who have faced deportation or saw their families ripped apart when they were left behind because they were born here through no fault of their own. But you know what? I've decided it's a topic worth going over because it's a huge issue every election year, and this year we don't have to debate in class. Not to mention, all of you are products of immigration. My family came over from England as indentured servants around 1624, and they've been here a long time, but they still had to immigrate to get here. Through taking an ancestry DNA test, I found out that I'm 78% English, 21% Irish, and 1% Norwegian, which was a surprise. Immigration makes up who we are as a nation, but also makes up who you are as an individual, even down to your physical characteristics. And what's even crazier, you might not even exist if just one person in your family tree, even going back thousands of years, wasn't able to immigrate and meet their future spouse and have a family. Immigration is in our nation's DNA, and it's in your DNA too. Last year during our short 3-day Ancestry.com unit, where all government students got free access to Ancestry.com for a while, and I taught them how to look through government census records to start building a family tree, I had students come up to the board and place a sticker on the map where they found their family to be from. For some, there were some major surprises, and some people found some pretty incredible stories about how their family came over or why their family came over to the United States. So needless to say, I hope I've convinced you that immigration is a really important topic worth going over. After researching the topic this week and looking through the pros and the cons of the different immigration policy proposals, I hope you can make a better argument defending the immigration policy you support. Some of you might even change your mind. For some, you may have never really given much thought to the idea of immigration or even cared. But as you begin to make friends with people who may be immigrants or are children of recent immigrants and share in their cultures, compete against immigrants for jobs, even maybe hire them for jobs, have immigrants as professors in college, and enjoy cultural aspects of immigration, you'll eventually be forced to have some sort of opinion on the matter. Not to mention the fact that many of you tell each other in arguments, if you don't like it here, you can leave. So let's begin investigating your options. So immigration can be summed up into 3 different policies, each with varying degrees to it. But the first one we'll look at is called closed borders. A nation with a closed borders policy allows very little to no immigration at all into the country, nor do they really allow people to leave the country. Even people coming there to work are on a very strict work permit. People that argue for this type of system often argue that by keeping other cultures out, you keep your culture pure and intact, while also keeping the nation safe and secure from others coming in that might wish to do the country harm or maybe even compete against other citizens for jobs. Opponents of closed borders argue that it keeps out other cultures and people that might bring innovative new ideas that the whole nation could benefit from. Not to mention, such a system seems pretty dystopian. If no one's allowed in, then who's to say anyone's allowed out? And if no one's allowed out, Probably the closest example to this would be North Korea, which lives as kind of like an isolationist hermit that has border walls and fences surrounding the entire country. Anyone trying to force themselves in or out is often shot or detained by border security. Now, seeing as that's actually a pretty rare policy to see be really implemented by a country, probably the most common immigration policy is semi-open immigration. In most nations with semi-open borders and immigration, there are quotas or set numbers for how many people can come over from a particular nation. Then there are often multiple hurdles someone has to get through if they want to come over. If they want to work, they'll have to apply for a work visa or a permit and likely get a background check followed by some sort of a medical examination. And if someone wants to live and work permanently in another nation to become a citizen of that nation, they will often have to go through those previous steps I just mentioned, as well as take a citizenship test, like the one I gave you guys in class this year that 90% of you failed. If someone wants to live and work permanently in the United States, they're usually going to need what's called a green card. Now, unless you win one in what's called the green card lottery, which yes, is exactly what it sounds like, you will have to apply for one, and that's not always an easy process. In nations with semi-open borders, there's often a moderate amount of border patrol and checkpoints at the border to make sure people aren't coming in illegally. Now, it's not quite the style and the extent that North Korea does, but semi-open nations don't leave their entire borders empty and open. Now, proponents argue this is a healthy middle ground to have that allows people in, but controls it in a way that keeps people safe. Opponents of semi-open borders argue this is a border policy with an identity crisis. If it's semi-open, you're likely still going to have some bad eggs slip through from time to time. Plus, what's to stop a bunch of people from trying to sneak through the few places you aren't constantly patrolling? Closed border proponents criticize this, saying that it's not secure enough, while open border proponents argue the system doesn't do enough to tap into the immense benefits of immigration. Then there's open borders, which is the idea that people should be able to live and work wherever they want so long as they don't trespass on someone else's private property. There are some examples of open borders today. For example, we have open borders between states in the United States, where you can move to live and work in any state and you're not stopped at the border and checked. The European Union is similar as well, where you can move and work in any member state without being stopped and checked at the border. These are sometimes referred to as frictionless borders. Proponents of open borders argue there would be a massive boost to the world economy, perhaps even doubling it, if all nations took away their immigration restrictions. Why? Well, some people are trapped in areas of the world where they just can't produce much or make much money for whatever reason. As for security, open borders proponents point to statistics showing just how rare it is for you to be killed or even attacked by a foreign-born immigrant. I mean, according to the statistics, you have a better chance of either being killed by lightning, a lawnmower, or an armed toddler. In fact, native-born Americans are more likely to commit crimes than foreign-born immigrants. Plus, if someone wants to rent an apartment or offer a job to someone from another country, what moral right do you have to intervene and stop them? Opponents of open borders argue that it's not always economically beneficial when there's free immigration to a nation with a welfare state, where there are things like Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, etc. Because immigrants haven't paid taxes into the system for long, but they may reap the rewards and benefits of the welfare system, causing a drain on taxpayers and the economy. Even Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman said you cannot simultaneously have free immigration to a welfare state. They also argue that keeping the borders unsecure and open may allow just anyone to come in and harm people. Now, regardless of which position you take on this, there are lots of things to think about. There are tough moral and philosophical arguments to consider. For example, philosopher Michael Huemer of Colorado University provided a really interesting scenario that might make you answer some tough questions. Now, here's Jack. Jack desperately needs food. Perhaps his food was stolen or a natural disaster destroyed his crops. But Jack has an awesome idea. He will walk to the marketplace and buy some bread. Unless, of course, it's during a pandemic, in which case Jack might as well just go ahead and die of starvation. Now, another guy, we'll call him Bill, is aware of all of this and stops Jack on his way to the marketplace, detaining him and preventing him from going to the marketplace. This means that Jack eventually dies of starvation. So, is Bill morally to blame for Jack's death? Is he guilty of murder? Now, Bill will likely argue, hey, it wasn't my fault that Jack was starving, and there's a distinction between killing him and letting him die. True, it wasn't Bill's fault that Jack was starving, but he did stop him from saving himself, and that is his fault. Now, maybe Bill would argue that food's expensive and Jack entering the marketplace, causing more demand for it, would just cause prices to go up, but Why doesn't Jack have just as much of a right to food as Bill does? If the farmer grew it and wants to sell it to Jack, why should Bill put a gun in his face and stop Jack from entering the marketplace to buy it? Again, Bill may counter and argue that Jack would be trespassing, but Bill doesn't own the whole marketplace, or for that matter, the whole country Jack is trying to enter. Now remember, in the US, we have a market economy based on private property. So stopping someone from going to shop in a private store by claiming they're trespassing doesn't really make sense. Unless there's not actually any private property and everything's owned collectively by society as a whole. In which case, that sounds kind of like... And if society truly does own the whole country through the government, then can't society also dictate your job, your religion, and everything else? Now, before you say the US isn't like that because we're a democracy and not a dictatorship, keep in mind violating human rights still happens even when the majority of people say so, even when it's popular. Things like this do happen and have happened. Like in 1939, when a ship called the MS St. Louis, carrying over 900 Jewish refugees trying to escape Nazi Germany, was turned away from docking in numerous nations, including the United States. The boat was forced back to Europe, and many of the Jews on that boat died in the Nazi concentration camps. Lastly, on the topic of immigration, there are a few economic fallacies I want you to stay away from in your arguments this week. Please remember, in an economy, there's never a fixed pie that never grows in size. Remember, when immigrants come into the country, not only are they working and producing more, but they're also consuming more, whether it be food, hardware, consumer services, education, entertainment, etc. That increased demand is good for the economy and more than offsets the additional mouths to feed. The secret to mass consumption is mass production, and more immigration adds to the labor market, helping spur mass production. That usually means cheaper prices and more jobs. So don't argue that immigration will lead to mass food shortages where we'll all starve and massive unemployment because there are more people here. That's lazy thinking. There are plenty of great arguments against free immigration, but that one, almost every person who has studied economics and immigration will dismiss. So pick a stronger argument than that. On the flip side, I don't want you to lazily point to a few economic facts and say, immigration will be great, end of story. What about the welfare state? Is immigration a drain on the economy? Well, what about border security? These are really good arguments against free immigration, and they deserve a response and at least a counter-argument. So your assignments this week. First, complete the Ed puzzle. It's a crash course video on the economics of immigration. Then I want you to complete a Google form that goes through the naturalization process and shows you just what immigrants have to go through before they come to the United States. Lastly, this week, I want you to answer the critical thinking question. What immigration policies should the United States pursue? We went over 3 of the policies in this video. Feel free to use any of the resources on that Google Doc. I also included some articles, so not just videos this week, for you to browse through and find some good arguments to use in your response. Don't forget to explore the other side of the issue and make a good counter-argument. Don't just pick one side and only look at the resources for that. Look at the resources from the other side and challenge yourself. As always, everything is due by Friday night at 11:59 p.m. By the way, Google Classroom is doing something cool with Google Hangouts. I'm not exactly sure what all we can do with it yet, but I'm going to try to experiment with it this week. So keep an eye out for a post that might ask if you want to join an impromptu Google Hangout session. And if you're wondering why I really haven't gone over current events that much, well, it's kind of because the Google slide I gave you guys in January is just turning into life. So I kind of feel like we've already been over everything. I mean everything, from the economic collapse to the Karen rebellion. It's pretty much come true. In fact, just a couple days ago, there was a protest outside the State House with a bunch of Karens. Besides Trump's stimulus checks hitting bank accounts last week, there really hasn't been that much else besides Trump declaring that he has supreme powers and total powers as president to tell the state governments what to do, which pretty much goes against what I taught you guys in regards to the 10th Amendment. But we'll see how that turns out. Anyway, good luck this week, and as always, reach out if you need anything.